All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for making time to reschedule today's Education Standards Committee meeting since our regularly scheduled time conflicted with the rescheduled state board meeting. Representative Reed communicated that she has a work conflict and so won't be able to make it, but I'll check in with her afterwards. I did put our agenda into the chat. I also sent it late last evening via email. And we have a reasonably short agenda. So I think that leaves us plenty of time to talk at length about the matters before us, as well as to end a little bit early if we don't have reason to continue with our full time. So before we dive in, anything anyone wants to add to our agenda that you don't see on it at the moment? Ruth is frozen, I think. Okay, I'm going to go with we're good with the current agenda. So then we'll start with our Connecting Across Lines of Difference panel. Oh, Ruth, can you hear us?
Yes, I went out, but I think it's all solved now, hopefully.
Okay. So let me ask before getting started, is there anything else you'd like to add to the agenda?
No.
Okay. So then we'll start with the Connecting Across Lines of Difference panel, which is confirmed for 5:30 next Monday evening. We have sent out invitations to the Cisac. I just saw the invitation go out to the Technical Writing Committee. And we've got a full slate of panelists. So I just wanted to give this time for Alistair and our staff to see if there's any additional preparation we need to do. And then anything we should be preparing for post-event follow-up, whether we want to do like a survey or thank yous for the panelists or anything like that.
Do we have an agenda for it, Jessica?
We do. Alistair, I'll leave this to you and I can happily answer any questions as helpful.
Thanks. Let me pull it up. I've been leaning heavily on the staff for help. And thank you, Alex, and others for helping me prep my questions and moderation. I'm curious, actually, first, do we know how many people have responded already and will attend?
As Jessica noted, or as Representative Sutter noted, the invite just went out to the Technical Writing Committee. However, the staff have shared the invite already with the Cisac. And if you bear with me for 30 seconds, I can tell you how many members of the Cisac have RSVP'd to date, just based on the calendar invite. Looks like it looks like so far we have 10 people who indicated that they will be in attendance from the Cisac list. I think one or two of those folks may have been maybes, but I did also just update that calendar invite this afternoon too. So there could be some additional stuff, but that's where we're at right now on the Cisac front.
Okay, and just what's the denominator of the total Cisac?
There were 26 originally, and I know that we've had a few who have since moved or fallen less in touch. So we'll use roughly 25 as the denominator.
Okay, all right, I feel good about that. And if that's where it stays, I think that still feels really productive. I'm very excited about the folks we have coming to speak with us, and excited to learn from them. Representative Wattenberg, I dropped the latest with crafted and with a lot of help from John Paul, Mr. Hayward, of what we're planning to do. But it's really a chance to learn from two academics who have been really taking lead on evaluating the efficacy of ethnic studies curriculum, and then two practitioners, one in higher ed and one in public schools. And so Kira, really eager to learn from them. I don't have any other updates, Jessica, but and having not done a panel like this before with the board, love the idea of being able to follow up with the panelists to say thank you. How have we done that in the past? And then following up with the Cisac members, I think is something that I'd love your advice on too, and what the best way would be, given that they're stretched on time. I hope that they can, use this as a chance to ask questions and learn. But I don't want to be. I'm coming into this without any deliberate sort of, the Cisac should do this, right? My approach is really thinking through how we can learn together. And so if they want to follow up with us, with the panelists, happy to continue working and moderating and convening. If they saw this as helpful to see what else is going on, and weave that into how at least they're asking questions, also happy to let that be where it is, right? So would love your advice.
Yeah, also I'll just say two things. Ruth, I forwarded to you and to Carlene and Alistair the invitation that Annette at OSSI sent out to the writers, just so you can see, like, we've got the panelists and hyperlinks to descriptions, bios of theirs. I was super excited that Dr. Bonilla was able to step in on the panel. She and I worked together in the summer of 2013 on a fellowship, and she is just super smart, super sharp. And when I saw that the study came out, I was like, oh, I know that co-author. So I think she'll be a great addition. One suggestion I have is that we decided to postpone the Cisac quarterly meeting, which was scheduled for tomorrow night, to a time in October, still TBD. We did that for two reasons. One, the standards feedback just came in, and the writing committee is convening tomorrow evening at the same time our Cisac meeting was scheduled for, to talk about how to make improvements based on the feedback they received. So we wanted to give that time to play out so that when we did meet with the Cisac, we could do so with real new information to share, rather than sort of coming right on the heels of their feedback. But I think a nice opportunity that comes up is after this panel, we can go ahead and use that quarterly Cisac meeting to debrief and say, like, are there things you'd like to do to follow up from, for those of you who attended the Connecting Across Lines of Difference panel, ideas you've got coming out of that, things you'd like to do to follow up. We can put that on the agenda for the Cisac quarterly meeting.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
All right. I don't know what is going on with my screen. I see my elbow, but that's all. So the screen is frozen. I can hear everybody. I can see everything. So let me just ask a question, which is, so who are the panelists?
So
That's
it's in your email. I just sent that to you.
In an email.
I just sent it to you in an email. Yep.
All right. Because I may have missed one of the chats because I was frozen. I don't know. But anyway, I will check my email right now.
I can put them in the chat too, Ruth, but there's a whole little description of the panel and everything. And there's the 4 panelists.
Great. Thank you very much.
One question and thought regarding follow-up and next steps with the panel. So the panel obviously is going to be for the Cisac members and the technical writing committee members. We'll make sure that, there's a video recording. I was in communication with Caitlin earlier today about whether or not we need to live stream it or just record it. I think just recording it is probably fine, but there might be some opportunities to utilize some of that dialogue for future discussion that the state board might have, or providing highlights on our social media around the conversation. Does that seem appropriate, Representative Chang, Sutter, and Wattenberg?
I think that would be great if we could record it and then be able to turn to it again for future reference.
Agreed. I was looking for my little reactions, but I don't seem to have the emoji reactions. So yes, I think that's a great idea.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, let me ask our staff, is there anything we ever, like, do we write thank you notes or anything to panelists? Have we done that in the past?
Yes.
It occurs to
in
me, I
the
don't know these
past-
things.
Yeah, yes, in the past, we have done both electronic thank you notes. In some cases, I know we've written handwritten thank you notes that I think under Representative Wattenberg's term were written and sent on her behalf as the board spokesperson. But I think either or both of those can be easily done and facilitated.
I don't have a preference. I don't know if Representative Chang does, but just that would seem important.
Yeah, and I hope, personally, I think this is hopefully the beginning of a conversation. And so if we could follow up, if we could get the team's help to follow up with folks digitally, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically what we also do is if there are still outstanding questions or loops that are still open, like making sure that that information is included in those thank you and follow-up emails. So as you noted, Representative Chang, that the conversation, can be ongoing and continuing.
I mean, also, if you CC the others that are relevant on the thank you, then everybody can be in touch, which is helpful.
Great. Okay, any other thoughts on the panel? So Representative Chang, you feel good about the run of show? You got ideas of the questions that you're going to throw out there and have the support you need to be ready for that? Great. I shared with staff, I am actually on vacation next week, so I will log in to be present for the panel, but will be doing so from another location and may have to cut out early as I am a little bit at the disposal of the family with whom I am traveling. Great. Okay.
Thanks for tuning in, Representative Sutter from
yeah.
vacation. Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't like a little bit of like conversation about connecting across lines of difference while at the seashore? You know me, I'm a social studies nerd all the times in all the places. Actually, I feel perfectly comfortable sharing this on the recorded meeting. When I was in Wisconsin last week, one of the things that I learned, which is not the least bit surprising to me, is that all of the water stops on the course of this all-day race were manned almost exclusively, it seemed like, by educators. I met the entire cross-country team of a local high school, the band, theater, and choir departments of another high school, the foreign language department of another high school, custodians and bus drivers. It was just educators all around volunteering. So, you never really leave the work. Okay, any other questions from staff or members about the Connecting Across Lines of Difference event? Okay, we are good to go then. So social studies standards, couple updates. The NASB article is out in the September 2021 standard, and I thank the state board staff for the really good social media promotion on Twitter with the good images. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to Alex Jew, who was a fantastic co-author, terrific editor, and really stayed on top of this piece even while he was out on leave. Super proud to be published with him in this piece. We've gotten some nice feedback on it. I ran into Scott Abbott this weekend and he was like, it's a good piece. I think it's great. So glad to know that folks in the work in the city are happy with it. And I hope that as folks on other state boards are able to dig in on the standard, that we may start to hear from folks in other states about our process or questions or ideas that they may have. So thanks very much to Alex and the whole staff for the work that helped make that happen. I'm sad to say, though, the print copy does not appear to have arrived in our mailboxes yet. I was in our office today and those were not in yet. So I'll be holding on for when we get our print copy. Second is the feedback from the Cisac and the state board on the social studies draft standards. So we received the download of the feedback from Beth Ratway at AIR working with OSSI. There was a lot of feedback. It looked like there were roughly 22 people who had accessed the survey at some point in time. So going back to Alistair's question about denominator, but still, I would say there were roughly, we'll call it 40 people who were given access to this opportunity for feedback. If you look at the 26 members of the Cisac plus board members, including student reps. And so there were 22 folks who provided some sort of feedback in the survey. I heard from a few colleagues on the board who had a few comments, but did not put in full survey feedback. Alex was kind enough to compile those comments, as well as a few that were sort of late breaking, folks who got into the survey after it had closed and still had a few things to share. So we heard from a few additional Cisac members that way. And Alex has put all that together and shared it with Beth and the team at OSSE in advance of the writing committee's revisions. I would say that the feedback was, and Alex, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this as well. The feedback was robust. There were a couple of themes. One was there's still a lot of work to do, right? That this was a first draft of the standards and there is much work to be done before we're ready for a public facing draft. The standards writers broke into grade band groups, and it is evident that there was perhaps not as much time as one might want for them to then come back and look across all the grade bands and check for coherence, common threads, common organization. So that's one piece of feedback that I think came up repeatedly and that we have also conveyed to the folks on the writing team. Also the manageability, right? One of the things we put in the guiding principles was fewer, higher, clearer. And while some of that came out in some of the standards, there are other places where maybe the standards aren't quite as manageable, where there seemed to be some feedback that there were too many standards at a given grade level, or while they had done a better job of fewer, perhaps they sacrificed clearer. So that was a common thread in the feedback. I think the last thing that I would say is that when you look at how content is sequenced over time, there seemed to be more opportunities where we could spiral knowledge and build on skills and content. And right now, perhaps we have more repetition than spiraling. So that's another piece of feedback. Are there ways to build and deepen students' access to knowledge and understanding over time, rather than simply repeating standards in different grade levels? Alex, is there anything else you would say about the themes in the feedback?
No, I think that's a good high-level summary.
So before I go on to some of the other next steps, I just want to see, Ruth, I know you were kind and put in good comments on the survey and told me that you'd gotten all the way through. Alistair, I don't know if you had the chance to, but thoughts, reactions, questions about the standards or your reaction to them?
Are you talking to me? I'm sorry, I went in and out. Is that to me?
Yeah, either you or Alistair.
Okay, well, I'll jump in. So I only looked at the elementary. So, and I am eager to look at the secondaries as well. And if there is any opening to still do that after the deadline, someone let me know and I will give some attention to that. I really was only able to do the elementaries, which I think does get to the manageability question. But the two things that I commented on, and I think they're really important, is one is the kind of the narrative chronological history that DC standards was one of the first, DC was one of the first to put into place about whatever it was, 10, 15 years ago, for which it got a lot of credit and which helped, I think, launch sort of a whole bunch of sort of content-based ELA curricula because it had a lot of content, not just sort of themes and abstractions and generalities. And I feel like it lost a lot of that. And I think it's really, really too bad. And I hope very much that part of what people revisit is that issue, because I think it was a huge strength of the previous standards. And we all wanted to revise what we had and build on it and improve on it and all that. But to me, that was a huge strength and I would hate to lose it. That's one. And the second thing, which you've all heard me talk about before, but I was really struck by it in the standards, that there's so many themes going on, and they're mainly important. I might not agree with every single one of them, but mainly they're good. But one result is one that I think does get totally lost as a whole building of democracy, ideas of democracy, principles of democracy, historically, how we expanded our democracy, how have sort of marginalized people played a role in creating that democracy. This is sort of our democracy, not, et cetera, that gets lost. And I just think we are at such a crux in our history where, we are really facing down a couple of huge issues. One is really around racial equity, racial equality, and the other is about democracy, period. And I think to not have that a really central theme is a huge, huge mistake. So I hope that gets revisited.
Can I ask a question about that, Ruth? Because I know that was a piece of feedback you'd given before and a thing you raised concerns about. But I went through today and pulled out the driving concepts that were headers on each of the elementary school standards. And I want to just share my screen here to show you what those driving concepts are and see, like, I read these and I thought I would have had almost the exact opposite reaction to what you did, which is, my goodness, there's so much democracy development in the early grades because the themes are representation, agency, and opportunity, along with cooperating in community. And they talk about like the DC Council in the first grade standards, and they talk about elected representatives and how people get to be representatives. So can you help me understand a little bit more about what you think would be helpful for young children to have about developing understandings of democracy that is not part of these like driving concepts?
Yes. So first of all, part of what I said in my comments is my general comments were not about first grade, which I agree with, you did have a lot. I think it's good to have it in first grade. I also think what you can do in first grade is limited conceptually and all that. So it's good to have it, but it doesn't take the place of also having it later. So I'll just say that, but I did like what was in first grade. In the other grades, what I would say, not to say that there wasn't good stuff, because there definitely was good stuff, but I think that part of it is about, I think there's a lot about agency, a lot about sort of civics, sort of the idea of participation, but civics, you can have civics in the old Soviet Union. You can have civics in modern Afghanistan. Civics is not the same as democracy. And I think part of what we want to convey is, what is a democratic society? What are the rules of it? What are the principles of it? What are the alternatives of it? Why do we care so much about it? And I think that some of the rule stuff comes in, but this idea that it is something unique in history, this idea of the American experiment, the idea that, this didn't always exist, and it doesn't exist increasingly in most of the world. And people should have a real understanding of what it means to have it and not to have it, and to understand what keeps it going at an age appropriate level. But and I think we're now faced very much, for the first time in my life, and I'm the oldest, with really being.
We lost you right at the end there, Ruth, when you were saying faced with.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sure it was super articulate, and now I can't repeat it, but basically the gist was that, now we're being confronted with and seeing just how fragile it is. What are the kinds of things that can fall apart? What are the kinds of pressures that can pull it apart? Why it doesn't exist everywhere, all of that stuff. And some of it's at the level of principles. Some of it, I think, is really about history. It's about, we didn't start out with a fully democratic society. We did start out with the ideas of it. And that really did make us different and unique in the world. And I think that's important to come through. And I don't even know that really comes through. But then it's the whole idea that those were ideals. And we all know that they weren't real in many ways. And so much of our history ever since has been trying to bring that to reality. And that's the drama, and that's the story. And that's part of what comes across, and I think did come across in the old in the more narrative chronological history, sort of the events, and I think there's stuff in there. And again, I want to say it's not that specifics aren't in there, but this idea of a story, the idea that in every generation, there are these things that you have to take on, and there's these ways that you have to push it forward, and there's those ways that you have to defend all that. I think it doesn't really come through. It doesn't come through as a continuing thread. I don't think it's memorable. And I think, so I think that's basically it. And the connection, part of what we say in our resolution is it's so much about how all the different, in the US in particular, more than elsewhere, it is such a diverse nation. It's such an immigrant nation. It has such a history. And to be able to talk about that and how the democracy was moved forward and expanded in all these ways, precisely because we were so diverse. So it's a way of, and I think, again, at this moment, more than any other, to sort of be able to thread together for students to be able to see all that together is really important. So.
Okay. Alistair, you offered something in the chat, so I just want to let you weigh in and add anything you're thinking about.
Oh, well, I guess Representative Wattenberg, you touched on it. I think I saw some of the pieces you're mentioning for the older grades, right? And so I'm flagging, I think page 134 of the draft in particular, and I'd love your feedback on whether or not they're getting to what you're talking about, because I agree that's really important. My piece actually is more of a question. I think, when we, unlike the two of you, I joined in January when this work was already underway. And so I've gotten bits and pieces of what happened before I joined. And one thing that I've picked up on
I'm listening, but I'm moving.
Excuse me?
She just wanted to let you know she was walking off screen.
Oh, okay. When we have conversations with educators and students too, is that, there's too much content to cover already, right? And my question to you, I think this is directly to you, Representative Sutter, is sort of how that was navigated in these conversations. Is this more? Is this less? Is it different from what has been taught previously, or what the standards have been previously? Will teachers and students feel like there's more added, or were there actually things taken away without a kind of side-by-side comparison? It's hard for me to tell. Yeah.
It's a good question. There's a little bit of both. There are places where there is considerably more content. One of the places that showed up most often in the comments was the middle school, that the 7th and 8th grade standards were made considerably bigger. Whereas some of the elementary school standards were, I think, streamlined. And streamlined to be more conceptually oriented, with opportunities for lots of rich content, but keeping the key driving concepts per grade very limited, right? So that there are 3 to 5 driving concepts per grade level in the elementary school grade, and then some number of standards underneath them. But none of the standards, I think, in the elementary grades get much over 35 standards per grade. The high school standards are also roughly in the range of 36 standards per full year course, and closer to 20 for a semester course. That goes a little bit astray in the middle school, and I think there's still some discussion as to how to best resolve that. Largely because we also know that middle school has been a place where students have inconsistently received full instruction in the social studies, and we want to encourage more of that, but perhaps not overwhelm them with standards just to get the instruction to happen.
An addendum to that question then is also on now execution. As I review this and think it through, it's there's this piece of the work I know does not talk about execution, monitoring, evaluation, or support systems for educators to actually do this work. And I'm wondering when that happens and who does that work.
Yeah, so the expectation is that once the board approves the standards, OSSI is responsible for the rollout of the standards.
Okay.
And that gets rolled out to LEAs, and then LEAs have the opportunity to take those standards and develop curriculum, et cetera. I am hopeful that there'll be opportunities to have continuing collaboration between the board and OSSI about opportunities to support the rollout of those standards, whether that be, you know, helping the community more broadly understand the new social studies standards and how they'll be processed through curricular decisions, et cetera. So that happens after we vote.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. You know, I think as always, the execution is, you know, is really important in how well the plan actually gets executed, right? In shaping, right? So, you know, I think for something like this, I like, I'm torn between, right? There's so many things our students need to learn, and maybe it's better for students to learn fewer things well than many things, but brushed over, right? And so that tension, I think, in part is not so much a reflection on what the plan is, but rather a question for how we execute it later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I appreciate that. Thanks for bringing that up.
But thank you so much, Representative Sutter. It's a big lift that that's been done, and I appreciate that you've also highlighted in our agenda every week the other standards that have not yet been revised.
Yes.
Since 2007, 2008.
So much work to come. So go ahead, Ruth. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I'm using my phone as a backup, so I'm likely to get screwed up, but I'll try. Anyway, one other thing which I did not raise in my comments formally, just because I kind of forgot, but I'm pretty sure that one of the things that's not in the elementary standards is sort of the holidays, songs, symbols. That is kind of a mainstay of elementary curricula. And I think that is a big loss, especially since we just got Juneteenth, which is a great learning opportunity. I mean, having, I guess I can't say recently raised kids that age because they're now in their 20s, but it seems like yesterday. And I do think that is so much how kids learn stuff. And the holidays, you know, for the most part are there, you know, for real reasons. And there's such opportunities to teach about them. So I think it's a huge loss. And I also think, if I had to guess, families will notice and not be thrilled.
So can I ask Ruth, because in our resolution or in the guiding principles, we do note that the effort is to take the standards beyond heroes and holidays. So is your concern that rather than going beyond, we took them out entirely?
Yeah.
Do you see there's a way to put them in while not sacrificing time on other content?
I mean, in general, absolutely. I mean, as I say, I think the standards as they are, and it sounds like others think it as well, you know, they need a lot of streamlining and they need a lot of sort of curating. And I think as part of that, absolutely, I think most of those holidays, they have something to do with history. They have something to do with democracy. They have something to do with, I'm trying to remember the names of the different driving principles with equality. I mean, they, you know, with, anti-racist. I mean, they're national holidays because they reflect something important for the most part. And so I think it would be very easy to put them in, and it's a way to organize things in those early grades to some extent, or highlight things, I would say.
Okay, thanks for that.
And yes, I'm for going beyond it, but I'm not for sacrificing it.
Okay. Okay, so coming back to the agenda, the next steps on this, as I mentioned, Alex shared back our additional compiled comments with OSSI. Tomorrow, the writing committee leads are meeting again to talk about the feedback and discuss the timeline and process for making updates. The plan is still that there will be a public draft of the standards available in November. I will be in touch with Aussie to learn more about, after tomorrow's meeting, what, if anything else, may happen in the interim, whether there is another draft in October, or if they're simply going to keep working towards a public draft in November. My hunch is the latter, but I will ask that question and follow back up with our committee and our colleagues on the full board. What I'd like to do briefly is just think about how we want to start requesting time of the board and the staff for engagement on the standards in November. I know Representative Thompson wrote to our full board today about the opportunity to still do some sort of state board focused community outreach. I spoke with her about her email and asked whether she had a preference for time. She seemed to think that November would still work for her timeline. So that's one opportunity. We could try to do the social studies outreach as part of some broader board outreach in conjunction with, say, the governance committee and their effort at outreach. We could have a public meeting panel and a call for public comment at our November public meeting. There's a couple of different ways we could do it. So just being mindful of wanting to get stuff on the calendar with plenty of time. What are your thoughts on using any part of our public meeting, either requesting public comment at that meeting and or having a panel? I'll say I am less keen on having a panel, but I would be more interested in having public comment. The only thing I could imagine using a panel for is if we wanted to specifically call out a few organizations that regularly review standards and invite them to share their thought on the draft standards at our public meeting. So, you know, Ruth, we've talked about this before. Fordham did their review of social studies standards. Perhaps we invite them to come and speak on the standards. Maybe we do the same thing with, you know, the National Council for the Social Studies, or someone from the Middle States Council for the Social Studies, or someone from the Human Rights Education organization that has been very involved with standards. I think that's certainly a possibility. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Alistair, you want to go first this time? I mean, and this is after we have a draft, is the idea?
Yeah, this is when we put the draft out for public comment during this like full-fledged public comment period that the board is really taking the charge on.
So one, I do like the idea of having some of the established groups sort of bring their comments to it because they follow it. And that could either happen at the same meeting as the public comment. You could even, I mean, there's some time here, you could have the panelists in November and sort of public comment in December, but either way works for me. And I just want to say one thing in terms of the multi-issue meeting. I have been I have gotten concerned that the STAR discussions not get put off as we try to pull together regional meetings or whatever we're going to do. And I still think that's important for people to start engaging on this, on the STAR issues. But if it's going to be in November and we haven't yet voted, definitely STAR can be a part of it. So I just wanted to say that. So. And should be, I guess.
Sorry, I was on mute. Any thoughts, Alistair?
Another abstract one for you, Representative Sutter, which is, I think also since joining in January for these kinds of engagement and feedback sessions, I've heard multiple times that people are wary of providing feedback if they don't see a channel for it to actually be reflected later on, right? It's a lot of time and effort. And so just how we think about, where that feedback goes and explaining that upfront, that process to folks. However, whatever commitments we can get for how that feedback gets incorporated, and so we can communicate it to our constituents to really make it worthwhile for them to engage, I think would be helpful. I know it's
Yeah.
heavy. Yeah.
Okay. So Ruth, let me just come back to your point about the multi-issue meeting. So I don't want to take any position on the STAR piece in this conversation, but I know that the social studies standards won't be ready until November. So one of the things I said to Representative Thompson was that I knew you were pushing for the STAR engagement to happen on the timeline we've set out. So to really take place in September and October, so that if she wanted to do these meetings, then I was all for it. But that if she was not looking to include STAR in it and instead was hoping to deal with governance and 2 other topics, that I would happily say November to use social studies, and then perhaps literacy or something from the advocacy and outreach committee might form the other 2 topics. So I don't want to take a position on that, per se, but I know that this won't be ready till November.
Yeah, and what I would say is for the moment, it's not that we've stuck with our timeline because we've moved it multiple times. It's currently, the thinking is a vote in November. And pending some understanding from OSSI about their plan, which may or may not be possible from their point of view, because I know they're juggling a lot of things. Potentially, it could move 1 more month, probably not. So it would be, whatever the 3rd Wednesday in November is. So that's sort of where we are now. But it's, like I say, we're still getting some feedback from OSSI on that.
Okay.
And my bigger concern with that, and again, pulling the STAR out of it altogether, it's really not, is just generally how this is going to work. There was a way in which it made a lot of sense if it was going to be sort of somebody, not us, was going to just sort of fly in and swoop in and sort of make some meetings, and we show up, and that's so nice. But if we're all organizing the meetings, I'm not for or against it. I'm not sure. I worry about whether everybody's going to be able to come through and how that's all going to work. That's all, because I know people have so much on them. So I just wonder how that's going to work. So I've been reluctant to sort of put all my eggs in that basket, and maybe this committee should be worried about that too, which is not to say don't participate, don't add energy to it. I'm not saying that. I'm just.
Got it. Okay. Well, I think then it sounds like there is thoughtful suggestion around making sure we're clear with where the feedback will go and how it will be used. Also, being mindful of the fact that we don't know if these state board group meetings will happen or not. So not putting all the eggs in the basket of that. And it sounds like support for inviting a panel to the November public meeting, if that's available, if leadership hasn't already sort of promised that away, to have folks who will have reviewed the standards and do this on the regular come and offer their feedback in a public forum about the standards. We could also broadly invite folks to provide public comment, like as we did with school reopening, to say one topic before the board at this meeting is social studies. We welcome any member of the public who wants to speak about their feedback on the draft standards at this meeting. Alex, Darren, any additional sort of questions on this?
No, I don't have anything, but just to confirm, Representative Sutter, so the suggestion would be that November's public meeting would be the opportunity for this type of engagement.
That's right. And I'll double check this with OSSI to make sure that there's no concern that this gets pushed back another month, but that is my best understanding now, and one I'm hoping we can hold to. I think December gets a little too tied up in everything else, and I'd like us to really push for November. Okay, I don't have anything else on social studies. Anyone else on social studies?
And this might be a segue to the next topic.
Oh,
Representative
and I
Sutter,
have one question, sorry.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Alistair, Ruth, go ahead.
So just on the last topic, so are we gonna be able to see all the different feedback, or that's just going straight to the Aussie groups?
Yeah, so it's gone straight to Aussie for now.
So am I correct to understand that one of the questions that Representative Wattenberg raised is around staff capacity and also board capacity for the fall?
Just in the sense that there had been an idea about using an outside contractor to pull together the meetings. That's not happening. I don't anticipate that the board staff has time to organize citywide meetings. Maybe they do. Any of them want to raise their hand and say we do? That's all I was referring to.
Okay, all right. And just remind me, there's another committee that's focusing on this, the governance questions and helping to think through how we prioritize, but otherwise we're sticking to the plan that we had all voted on, right?
Say that
Wait,
again,
what-
Alistair.
Just thinking about, where we spend our time and focus and how that's decided. Is there a committee that's focusing on that, or is that's something that we decide as a board when we're all together? This might be a question for you, John Paul. Sorry, Mr. Hayworth.
I apologize. I've actually been on calls, so I missed the question.
Oh, that's okay. No worries.
Alistair, are you talking about in terms of the meeting or in terms of the overall board?
I just heard you say you were nervous and wanted to be cautious that things don't, the work that you've been doing on STAR doesn't get pushed. Was it pushed out or pushed back? Was that what I heard?
Yeah, but that's not about this. That has to do with a decision that has to do with Aussie's timeline. That's not a
board thing. Okay.
No,
All right.
no, and not
Okay.
not from where I sit.
Okay. Just want to make sure I'm understanding how procedurally where we are. So for literacy then, I'd love to give an update on, I think it's also an Aussie related thing more than it is a board related thing. So I met with Siobhan Gibson and shared with her some of the ideas that we had developed last time, and I'll just run through them, the ones that we had discussed so we're on the same page. Around the literacy plan, and part of it was developing some of the engagement materials on how to implement specific aspects of the plan, how we could develop as a board more resources for educators on how to implement the plan and who to turn to for support, developing a corresponding plan to advance adult literacy and then focus in on other demographics that were not as in-depth included in the current plan, developing appendices that focus on other literacy stakeholders that are not as deeply engaged in the plan, like public librarians, right? And so kind of walking through some of those points with Ms. Gibson was really helpful. And so want to flag a few things that I learned, and I see a lot of opportunity for us to productively collaborate around this. So it is looking more like a $15 million federal grant, not 16, and 95% of that is going to LEAs. The applications are open now for LEAs to apply for 2-year grants with 2-year extensions. And those LEAs would be creating their own local literacy plans, and with a group of external reviewers using the literacy plan that you have seen as the sort of framework. They would be reviewing those grant proposals, and only things that align with the plan are allowable expenses. She said, that generally those ideas were good, and that they've only got one staff person who's working on this, and only part-time is what I understood. And so, there was interest in our team being able to work with that one staff person from OSSI who's really working on the literacy plan and actually executing some of those ideas. And so planning to have a conversation, the next conversation on September 28th with more team members from OSSI. I think, you know, for now, I'm planning to bring Mr. Hayworth with me to have this conversation and then come back to the group, but also wanted to open to see if either of you, and I'll extend the same invitation to Dr. Reed, wanted to participate as well. It's 30 minutes, so I don't think we can get into too much depth on each of these topics, but rather thinking, you know, working at the macro level as OSSI and the DC SBOE, and thinking about how we might work together again towards this broad goal that you know I've been pushing for since I joined, which is to be able to bring all the stakeholders together to actually really support our students to achieve their reading outcomes that I think are absolutely necessary for them to be successful in school.
Thanks, Alistair. I appreciate that update. I have one question about the grant that may be helpful to ask in this question on the 28th. So if 95% of this money is going to the LEAs, has OSSI already decided what they're spending the remaining funds with, or is that still up for input?
I will ask.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm trying to, as I say, wrap my head around this, and it's not getting around. So is the idea, I mean, will OSSI have sort of guidelines for this, or is their literacy plan in effect the guidelines that are going to determine how the grants get, okay. All right. So to some extent, I mean, I get the part about the corresponding plan for adult literacy, because it seems like that's just a vacuum. And so if we want to walk into it, we can walk into it. And so that's a plus, and I think it's important. I also, and I think this is true for all of us, what's going on in the schools, K-12, K-3, K-2 is so important. I don't want to not pay a lot of attention to it. With this grant coming in and the new council, I mean, in addition to the, you know, to the grant, the council put in also, is it 15 million? I'm trying to remember what the number is. I don't think they're the same. So there's a good amount of money going into this. Some of it in grants, some of it in what I guess the LEAs will do on their own. I don't know if they're preparing plans, whatever. So, you know, being able to, you know, maybe that supporting the schools or the LEAs is important. I mean, I'm not generally for us helping OSSI with staff, given that they have many, many, many times more staff than us. But insofar as we are in touch with the schools and the LEAs in a grassroots way, maybe there's a way to be supportive there, to connect people to resources, and maybe that's what you're talking about. But I get a little lost there, I guess.
No, that's I'm thinking through some you're getting me to think of a few things, Representative Wattenberg, but Representative Sutter, do you have any reactions to, and then I'll talk.
No, I mean, I think one of the challenges with this whole literacy plan idea and our role in it is that it is amorphous, that the concrete pieces of it do seem like they'll be handled. So the plan itself is very researchy, to like fail to come up with a better word, right? It's a very academic plan about what the research says and what thus would be good ways for DC to think about literacy. But it feels like the grant money behind the plan is going to be deployed mostly to the LEAs. So one sort of theory of action is I and LEA apply for the grant money. I'm sure there's some required goals that OSSI has placed on this RFP, right? There's probably a request for proposals for the kinds of things OSSI will let LEAs do with the money that are likely aligned with the research. But that appears to be the vehicle by which OSSI is implementing this literacy plan. My understanding is our read of the plan is that that's one way to do it, but there are many other ways that this literacy plan could be made actionable. And since OSSI is taking this one slice, what other slice could we take to expand the potential impact of the plan? So when I listen to your question, Ruth, I'm not sure I feel it's like we're not supporting OSSI with staff. It's how are we taking this research piece and saying, OSSI's made one call on it, but as another state level entity, we see gaps and we think we're well positioned to fill one of those gaps, whether by relationships or testimony or events or support. Like there are many opportunities we could take up, but I think that's where we're headed.
Can I
But
just
it's kind of amorphous, so we're like making it up as we go.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? When you say we can do these things that you were just describing, because there's this opening, are you speaking specifically about the opening around adult ed, or you're talking about everything?
I mean, I'm talking about whatever, you know, Alistair laid out the kinds of
Yeah,
things.
no,
we
then
talked
I
about.
agree with you. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said. I think I see it the same way, which is,
So
You don't see it the same way you're saying.
no, I do. No, I do, is that insofar as we can figure out a way to fill a gap, that's what we want to do. Figuring out what that is not easy.
I think that the
Yeah.
overlap actually aligns incentives quite nicely in a few areas, and one of the top things that Ms. Gibson said that they're thinking they're looking for help with actually right now is around engagement around the plan, right? And to me, that really falls squarely into some of our roles as representatives, as elected representatives, to be sharing awareness, getting buy-in cultivation, right, from our constituents around something that, you know, is really setting the stage for how we think about our literacy education over the next 5 years, right? And so when I think about also our work as a board around developing this kind of engagement material, these kinds of engagement materials, to me, that really stands out as something that would be really exciting and propelling the board forward as in our role that would be really beneficial to our families and our educators, right? And I think of that as a heavy lift, but also something that we're uniquely positioned to help with, given both our policy expertise and also our relationships within our respective wards. And so I do think that there is a very interesting role to play around focusing on a group like adults, right? And at the same time, perhaps a less heavy lift, right? Because that would require us to really build that plan rather than think about sort of how we translate the existing plan into actionable steps for our constituents, which I feel like is a narrative that I get really excited about, and that we could really partner with OSSI on. And so for something like that, and you know, Representative Weinberg, I absolutely get what you're saying. I would feel our staff is so stretched that, right, I don't want to be doing OSSI's work with our team, right? This feels, and I do think that line we need to be thoughtful about, and making sure that we are really thinking about how our team is focusing on the things that are most beneficial for our constituents, really thoughtfully playing a role that, you know, only they can play as well, right? And really adding value. And when I think about, you know, all those criteria coming together and and also the urgency for me around what's happened with the pandemic and how difficult literacy instruction virtually has been, especially for the younger students. I do feel a need to be doing from our role more of this engagement work, right? And I think that can take many different shapes, right? And so I guess my ask to the two of you and then to Dr. Reed as well is really around sort of doing a little bit more scoping with OSSI in this next meeting, and then coming back to you, probably having a few more back and forth conversations, thinking about where the puzzle pieces actually fit, what our capacity is as a committee, what our capacity is as board members, and then what capacity we have as DC SBO, as far as DC SBOE staff goes, right? And then thinking about what our options are there to kind of, what is the way that I like to think about it too is, if we invest this much of each of those resources in XYZ, what can we get out of that for our constituents, right? And then being able to map that out. It's hard for me to imagine where this really adds value if it's not done in pretty close collaboration with OSSI, since they have all the funds for this right now, right? And so thinking through how we're really supporting the smart use of those funds, to me, feels really important, and something that we could be helping to make sure that this money gets spent in a way where we can really see outcomes for our families. And I think there's a lot more work that goes behind that we could be helping with, especially now.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me, Alistair. And I think that having that conversation with OSSI and then coming back to let us know sort of like how the scope of the conversation has evolved is super helpful. I will offer one thing, because I know it happened in between your last meeting and this one. Siobhan is now Dr. Gibson.
Exciting. Okay.
Yes. Go ahead, Ruth.
Well, congratulations to Dr. Gibson first.
Mm-hmm.
So Alistair, I don't know if you can give some concrete examples of what you mean when you say, our role is to help our constituents really take advantage of. And it may be that part of what you're saying is you can't answer that yet, and that's what you want to sort of waylay for another meeting. That's fine. But if you do, it would help me make sense of it. So that's one thing. And the second thing I just want to throw out is, if part of the idea is engagement, depending on your answer to the other one, is, one thing that we could very much do is, we've got an October meeting, an October public meeting agenda. We've just developed a November one. Maybe in December, think about having some reading experts and what I just call the y'all come, invite people to come talk about what's being proposed and how they see themselves in it, and what they need us to do to make it real. But now you about your.
Yeah, no, and I do think that part of it is also thinking about how they're thinking about their relationship with the LEAs as well, right? But I'll give one and this is not a representative example, right? Because there's so many different paths this could go down. But as a very short one, right? The plan asks for LEAs to develop materials and guidance and support for parents and guardians for what they could be doing at home and elsewhere in the community to be supporting the development of literate rich environments at home and supporting literacy education beyond school hours, right? And those are things, when I talk with educators in my ward, they would love some support around building, and also making sure that they don't do that. No one's recreating the wheel 100+ times, right? Well, depending on how many LEAs actually get this grant, right? So, and in part, I think that's something that has been difficult in my world, right, of how we, customize these kinds of resources for families is actually the most successful ones are very hyper local. The broad ones that have been done nationally are really effective when they're translated by local community members for their constituents, right? And so I see a really important role to play, and I just used that one as a very, very, very short, specific example for me, right? But then thinking about, that's what I mean by engagement, and kind of filling gaps of where we could be helping to connect the different LEAs that get the grant with our families that elected us, with the educators that are seeking support right now to actually follow and fulfill the actual plan, right? And right there, I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to be deepening our relationships and trust with our constituents in a way that also aligns with the plan and helps to move literacy forward, I think is the broad framing.
Does that help, Ruth?
Yes, I look forward to, yes. And obviously we just need to do more in terms of making it concrete, but yes, very helpful. I mean, I think part of what you're saying is how to, this is part of what I'm taking from it, is that at least one of the pieces is playing a role in connecting LEAs to their families. That's a hard thing for schools to do, and maybe that's something we can.
And it's something that I've also noticed, every board member, and I don't know how, I can't speak to having, worked directly with boards in the past, but, I think folks have been actually very good at too this time with this board, right? And so leveraging that as an asset for us feels like value add, both for Aussie and for our families.
Got it. Okay, so we will look forward to another update after you and John Paul are able to meet with Dr. Gibson on, it sounds like the 28th. Let us know what we can do in the meantime. And then before we know it, we'll be, heading for our October committee meeting, and we can always add that. I'll keep this item on the agenda. The other thing we had on the agenda for today, I had under new business, was this revisiting the codifying the state process for revision of standards. This is another thing that I think we need to think about public engagement on. As Alistair notes, below the meeting agenda every month, we have the list of all the other standards that haven't been updated. And one of the things we put in our work plan is an interest in asking the public, where do we go next? Once social studies is done, what would you next hope for the state board to take up? One thing we could do is chronologically, we could go to arts education. But we could also hear from the public that maybe embedded technology is next most important to them. So I think we'd love to hear from the public and think about how to do that. I think, again, the state board engagement event is one way to do that. We could make that like an exit ticket for the public. We could ask it as part of social studies engagement. I think there are a couple ways we could do it. But for me, this body of work matters for our committee to keep on our agenda and keep working towards. But given the timing of the social studies feedback, I'd love to see if there's a way we could at least do the first engagement with the public concurrent with that. Like, we'll have the public's attention already on the state board is involved in state standards. The state board worked with Aussie on a process for revision of standards. Where would you have the state board go next? I'd like that to be part of that discussion, that initial feedback. Any thoughts or reactions on that? I think one open question is like, what does Aussie have the capacity for, and what else is on their docket? But I do think it would be a shame to lose momentum on, there are still standards that are outdated and in need of review.
I think it makes a lot of sense to ask people at the social studies engagement, which of these are important to them. The other thing I would be very interested in is, the extent to which each of these, from the point of view of the field, has changed a lot since they've been put in. And I mean, I just don't know enough about it to know what, I mean, are there big things that have changed in world languages that we should change? I have no idea. And I'd be curious to know from the different fields, what are the big changes that have been made since then? And therefore, does it deserve to be high on our priority versus some field where it's, the changes are huge and the need for change is huge based on something.
Yeah, that's super helpful, Ruth. That's a really good point. The sort of like, how far has the field come in that time? I think the other thing that I neglected to say is that one piece of this codifying process that already kind of exists is that the NASB standard article really lays out all the work that we did and the back and forth with OSCE. So I think we can also excerpt some of that into a less journal form and more sort of straightforward, like, how does DC approach revision of standards? Well, step one is figuring out which standards to revise. Step two is this process that was designed. And I think the question is whether we think that there needs to be more than just a documented codification, or whether it needs to go further to say something like, in other states, there is law that puts a timeline on it. Do we need to do that? Or does having a process and making it a procedural norm of the state board to consider new standards at least every 10 years, is that enough? So I don't know if either of you have thoughts on that, whether we need to be thinking more like council ought to put something in the regs or, in the law, or OSCE should put something in the regs, or do we need to just make it form and habit of the board?
Mhm. I just met with some German educators over the weekend, and so one thing I'll just flag, and I find this really interesting as a transatlantic comparison, is that they were commenting on how regularly we update our standards.
They're saying that about the US?
Yes, right. Versus, theirs have not changed in more than decades for the most part. And the pro and con is, right, pro is the educators maybe 30 years of teaching in are kind of doing the same thing and then actually implementing exactly what they studied to teach when they were in university, right? And the con is, right, it's not necessarily changing as much with the times. And so it was interesting for me to hear, because I've been in the sort of like, why don't we update them all the time, right? But their feedback to me was, well, because that changes how educators need to prepare every year, right? And so thinking through sort of what the, and then also just flagging our home studies conversations that we've had, and the resistance that we've gotten from a lot of homeschool parents to revising those plans also. Just want to think through sort of, when I think social studies was very urgent and timely given what's happening and where we were with those standards, right? With something like math, right, that is there something really innovative that's been put out that we aren't incorporating? Is there a call to update them from our educators and from our families? I think without that, I wouldn't say, every 5 years they need to change, or every 20 years even they need to change, rather build out a more of a process. But I'm still thinking this one through.
Yeah, that's super helpful, and a super helpful comparison internationally to sort of what is an adequate review of standards at what's the appropriate interval at which we take that up.
And if I might just, I know I sound a bit like a broken record, so I apologize, but to that point about building on sort of what's best and sort of not dramatically changing everything all the time, I think that is just it's an issue with the social studies, that here you have people put this into place, have developed materials and blah, 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 blah. And it's such a full overhaul. And I guess all my instincts are if we could figure out how to improve on what we had, to add in what we didn't have, as opposed to completely changing it. It's such an American thing, right? So that's all. And
Yeah, I think the one thing I would offer though, Ruth, on the social studies is our guiding principles came out of, a 26-member community panel who felt like some of the things we had and some of the materials that we had created were not good and or were perhaps damaging to the content, the access to content that young people received. And then our writing committee, also comprised of educators, while obviously we all agree that the draft still needs significant work, made changes aligned with their read of the guiding principles, as well as their sense of what students deserve to be introduced and exposed to. So I think the tricky thing with social studies, it's always going to be the tricky thing with social studies in our country, is that people's understanding and feelings and beliefs about what children ought to know and be able to do are heavily influenced by time and evolution of understanding of history. And, I do want to respect the fact that we involved educators heavily in this process and that they may take a different perspective than we do. Does that make sense?
yeah, I would say, the way I heard it was we need to have these new things, not explicitly that we need to get rid of certain things. Now, even from the beginning, I had raised that there were things that some of these issues, but that's all. And people don't have the same views. I agree. I think they're, anyway, point. I made my point.
Okay. Okay. I don't have anything else for our agenda. Our next steps, we will look forward to seeing folks at the Connecting Across Lines of Difference panel. Alistair, you'll reach out if there's anything else you need to do in terms of help with in preparation, but the invitation, including the Zoom link, is now in everybody's email boxes from the committee, along with the list of panelists. I will keep folks apprised of what I learned back from the OSSE Writing Committee on the social studies comments and how they get incorporated into the next draft of the standards and when we can expect that. As long as that timeline keeps, we'll move ahead with asking leadership to make time and space at the November public meeting for a panel, and we can address who's on that panel as we get closer and have more details on the date of the release of the public draft. Alistair is going to meet with Dr. Gibson, and John Paul is going to join him for that, and then we'll hear more about sort of a refined scope of potential work around the literacy plan. And we'll keep talking about the codifying state process, but it sounds like first link to the public will be at whatever public engagement we do around social studies in November. Cool. Thank you all for a good time. I will see you on Wednesday at 5 o'clock for our special session, and then at 5:30 for our public meeting. Thank you to the team for all the great work. If you haven't shared the NASB standard article, it would be great to just share that out with your networks, whether you're LinkedIn or folks you communicate with about social studies, because I'd like us to keep hyping as much as possible the energy around the social studies so that when we get the draft out, that we really do, to your point, Ruth, get rich engagement on this. We want a lot of folks to weigh in and give us their take. Cool.
Okay, bye guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.